Vice President Kamala Harris's team just posted the following meme. Voters tuning into the election for the first time. They see J.D. Vance calling people without kids sociopaths. You're seeing Trump's unhinged racist interview, Trump's cognitive decline, and Donald Trump saying the late, great Hannibal Lecter would like to eat you for dinner, and other very weird and unhinged statements that Donald Trump makes in his various traveling fascist circus events, the WWE cosplay fascism that he calls his rallies or speeches. Joined by Simon Rosenberg. Simon writes Hopium Chronicles. He leads Hopium Chronicles, friend of the MeidasTouch network. Welcome, Simon.
It's good to be here, brother.
Simon, you posted the following. Here are 7 new national polls, all showing Vice President Kamala Harris ahead. We had you on here when the corporate media was pushing this red wave narrative several years back, and you were pushing back against that narrative. Yep. You were right. That's how you and I really first connected and became really good friends. Tell us, though, Simon, these polls, real or just feels? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing you look for in any kind of trend is if everything is pointing in the same direction. And right now, we have had very consistent data coming this week, which is surprising. But where I think things are is that since Biden made his remarkable, historic, selfless act to step aside, last week we sort of saw the vice president kind of catch up. I mean, we were a few points down and there was movement. And then this week, we saw additional movement in polling where she's now ahead in almost every poll taken this week. And in one of those polls that you showed, the YouGov Economist poll, which is sort of considered to be arguably the highest quality weekly tracking poll, she gained 5 points from last week. And that's a poll that usually moves a point. It's very stable. It's a large number of interviews. And so there's been dramatic movement in the race, 4 or 5 points towards her. I think she now today has a modest lead. And I think we've also seen 2 sets of battleground state polls this week. And in those 2 polls, one done by Bloomberg Morning Consult and another by Public Opinion Strategies, which is a Republican polling firm, by the way, she's ahead in Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, tied in Georgia, and just behind 2 points in North Carolina. So it's a new bluer election. We have a lot of momentum behind us right now. We're obviously seeing all this money being raised, all the volunteers that are signing up. But keep in mind, in terms of polling, there are a whole bunch of things that haven't happened yet that are likely to benefit us in the next few weeks. One is this continued rallying around the vice president. I'm not convinced that is finished yet. There may be more upside for her on that. Next week, we're going to have this incredible spectacle of the VP pick starting on Tuesday and a whole, 5 days of campaigning afterwards, which is going to really be a time where we're going to dominate the discourse. And then we have our convention. And then, of course, something that you're very good at explaining, Ben, is that, and we have the daily, ugliness of Trump and Vance, which has also now become a major part of the dynamic of the election, which is Trump. They're continuing to put negative sentiment and negative noise for them out into the discourse. And so I think it's reasonable to assume that we could gain a couple more points in the next few weeks. And then finally, all that money that we have and all the volunteers is going to build an unprecedented grassroots army for us in the fall. We'll never have seen the kind of early vote and GOTV operation that's going to be in place. And that could easily add another point or 2 to us. And so, where things stand a little less than 100 days out, I would much rather be us than them. I think we've got momentum on our side. And if we go out and do the work, I think we can kick their ass in November.
Let's talk about Donald Trump, the 2024 candidate, the leader of the Republican Party, going around and saying things that are highly offensive, racist, xenophobic, and frankly, outright weird. And we saw all of that on display yesterday, but we could do this interview at any specific time frame, and I could reference what he did yesterday. And it's escalating in weirdness and the hate as he gets more desperate. Like yesterday, of course, here's the moment that everyone's been talking about. He's sitting at the National Association for Black Journalists. He's asked a question about Vice President Kamala Harris. Let me just show you the clip. Here's what he says.
Follow-up, sir, and then we'll move on to other questions here. Some of your own supporters, including Republicans on Capitol Hill, have labeled Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the first Black and Asian American woman to serve as vice president and be on a major party ticket, as a DEI hire. Is that acceptable language to you? And will you tell those Republicans and those supporters to stop it?
How do you define DEI? Go ahead. How do you define
diversity, equity, inclusion?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Is that what your definition?
That is
give me a
literally
definition
the words
then. Would you give me a definition
DEI.
of that? Give me a definition.
Sir,
of
I'm
that.
asking you a question,
No,
a
you
very
have to
direct
define
question.
it. Define it for me, if you
I
would.
just defined it, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a Black woman?
Well, I can say no. I think it's maybe a little bit different. So I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much, and she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was Black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn Black, and now she wants to be known as Black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she Black?
She is always
But you know
identified
what?
as a Black woman.
I
She went to a
respect
historically
either
Black
one.
college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a Black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do you believe that she is
somebody should look into that too when you ask continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
It's a direct.
Simon, in your political career, have you ever seen anything like this?
You know, it's funny. There are these moments in campaigns where you don't really know initially how it's going to go, right? And I haven't watched that since yesterday, and it's worse today. It's actually worse. It's more offensive and crazy. And, you know, it's sort of, I had a similar reaction to when Vance got picked. I didn't really know a lot about JD Vance, to be honest. I hadn't spent a lot of time studying him. And when I saw this clip of him saying that women needed to stay in abusive marriages for the good of the children, I was literally stunned. I was stunned, you know, I was like, I can't even believe he just said that. I can't believe how crazy this is in this day and age, that he believes that women who are getting beaten and sent to the hospital should stay in marriages because it's good for the children, as if anything like that would ever be good for anybody. And I have a similar reaction now watching that video, that Trump, the more that people watch that, the more this is going to be sort of a major disqualifying moment for him. And in a way that may not have crystallized it before. And I think you're right. You said something very important, Ben, is that we all know this, right? Any of us who've been following him closely, you know, we know the essence of Trump, right? Trump 2024 is a far weaker and more deranged candidate than he was in 2016 and 2020. You know, he's a rapist, fraudster, traitor, felon. He's a racist, a xenophobe. He's unfit. He's unwell. He's an extremist. He's dangerous. All of these things are true, and they were true 2 months ago. They were true 6 months ago. They were true 8 months ago. And now what's happening is that I think the electorate, now that Joe Biden's struggles are not dominating the news, his ugliness and his extremism are becoming exposed. He's like standing out in an open field now for everyone to see. And it's going to really hurt him and hurt the Republican Party because it's extreme and wild and unacceptable and disgusting. And he's a disgusting pig. And JD Vance is a disgusting pig. And the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln and Reagan, has fallen so far by this ticket. And so I am remarkably optimistic about this moment, that this contrast the vice president has wanted to establish between forward and backward and not going back, or between her, you know, her modern vision for the country and their retrograde, reactive, dangerous vision. It's going to be much easier, I think, starting today to make that case than it was even 24 hours ago.
How do you think it's going to, how do you think this will impact things, that Donald Trump has canceled the debates unilaterally? Vice President Kamala Harris says, well, I'm going to show up on September 10th in ABC, and I'm going to debate an empty podium if I have to. She goes around now saying, look, you want to say things about me, Donald? Say it to my face. Say it to my face, which not only, just is the perfect comeback, but again, it's just to your point, Trump just feels like a much weaker, pathetic candidate. And picking JD Vance, someone who's changed his names and identity 3 to 4 times over the course of his life to fit whatever he thought would be best for his, career, including the previous iteration was the anti-Trump fake hillbilly before going the full MAGA misogynist. How do you think the electorate's going to factor that in?
Listen, I think we're in this very new dynamic in the election where Kamala Harris and Joe Biden together, right? I mean, just look at today, right? I mean, Joe Biden, this news from the administration today, incredible prisoner swap, incredible act of diplomacy and leadership by the United States. We saw another month of declining flows to the border. We're now below the flows at the end of the Trump administration. We had great economic news this week, and we're going to see an interest rate cut. I mean, we've basically defeated inflation. We're continuing to generate. And then you have her rallies and her, just this energy around her. We're generating all of this positive sentiment and positive news. And they're like an ugly factory, right? Like that's pumping out ugly sentiment, every day. I'm stunned by this. I mean, I don't think that Trump and Vance any longer have the capacity to generate a positive news cycle for them. All they can really do is to try to do what he did yesterday, which is to generate a negative news cycle for us, but that's also going to blow back and hurt him. And so they're in this kind of incredible spiral right now, right? Where it's not really clear to me with the amount of time that's left, with the options that are in front of us, that they have the ability to fundamentally break this current dynamic that's in place, which is very positive for us. The other thing I want to say about this, and I don't want to leave this because I think this is going to be something we all have to, the way that Trump is playing Harris's race, it's just very simple, actually, because he's kind of an idiot, is that, she is both of Indian heritage and her father was Jamaican, right? And so she's both Black and Indian in the way that many Americans are biracial, including, for example, J.D. Vance's 3 kids who are half Indian and half white. J.D. Vance's middle child is named Vivek, right? He has a son named Vivek Vance. And the Trump Vance campaign is somehow pretending that they're confused about sort of a biracial, that somebody can be biracial and have two, complex identities in the way that, people were Irish and German and of course it's the American melting pot. And the idea that Trump is somehow trying to make an argument that she's not Black, it is arguably the craziest thing that we've seen in American politics in the last 30 or 40 years. And they're keeping on it today, right? They're not moving away. This is clearly something that Trump, in his idiocy, has invented himself, right? In his understanding of himself as a political genius, because there's no way there's polling data to back this stuff up. There's no way this was developed by the campaign itself. It's not conceivable. And it's putting J.D. Vance and his wife in a very complicated position that I think is going to make the estrangement of Vance and Trump even more, which is already apparent, even more significant in the coming days.
You think Trump is regretting that J.D. Vance selection, and you think J.D. Vance is, J.D. Vance is an opportunist, so and probably very delusional as well. But what do you think happens with them?
I have a feeling that there's some aspect of what's happening right now in Trump's crazy brain that he's punishing Vance by doing this Indian stuff. That some of what's driving this is his anger and frustration at Vance, and how, Vance is now the most unpopular VP pick in American polling history. There's never been a VP pick who immediately polled in negative territory. He was -6 last week. He's -15 this week. He's continuing to drop. He's created an enormous amount of negative noise for the campaign, not just in traditional media, but on social media. He's been a disaster. And what it did was that and what's clear is the campaign has made it very clear, the political people, that he was not their pick. They clearly had vetted him. They understood the stuff that was going to come out, all the stuff that we've seen, the cat lady stuff and the video about women staying in abusive marriages. They had seen all this, and they told the former president to not pick him, and they had other options. Trump, because of whatever, he cut a deal with Elon to get $500 million, or because his son came to him, and whatever it is, whatever got to Trump, I think he overruled the campaign and he picked him. And the campaign, by the way, within a few hours of Vance's pick, was already planting stories saying they didn't do this, right? This was Trump did this, and Donald Jr. did this. Yeah, it's a disaster. Look, I think that when you look back at this magical moment that we're in now, there are three things that really contributed to it. One was the picking of Vance, which I think undermined Trump's ability to gain at the convention. It sort of, I think, scared even Republicans, given how extreme he was, and it put downward pressure on their convention bounce. Two is Joe Biden's selfless act, and three is Kamala Harris, coming out of the gate in a very commanding and strong fashion. I think all of these three things together have congealed into this moment that we're in, but central to them was Trump's picking of Vance and Vance's just outrageous extremism, the crazy things that he's saying, which are just coming, look, he did a lot of interviews, right? And so every day we're finding new crazy stuff that he said. And I have a feeling that's going to go on for weeks and weeks to come. And there's no way for them to turn that off. And so I don't really know what they're going to do. I mean, I think Trump, I don't think mentioned Vance yesterday at all. When he was asked about him being ready on day one, he gave this crazy answer that VPs don't matter, right? So it's clear that he's regretting the decision. He's aware that it's dragging the entire ticket down. And I think in his own diseased brain, he started punishing Vance by now raising this issue of biracial heritage and everything else, which is obviously going to make this campaign very uncomfortable for J.D. Vance, his wife, and their three children.
There was that one moment where Donald Trump was asked during that interview before the National Association of Black Journalists whether he thinks that J.D. Vance would make a good president if something were to happen. And Donald Trump's response was that you don't really even need to think about those things when it comes to the vice president. I mean, what a strange statement, to make. Not exactly an endorsement.
No, it was ridiculous. And, look, it is okay for us now to feel joy and happiness and enthusiasm and optimism about our ticket. But we also need to stay steely-eyed about that, because there is this vast normalization machine in the traditional media of their extremism and their wildness. And I think that for the last few weeks, for the first time really in a long time, in part because of Vance, and I think Vance has even horrified some people in the mainstream media, we've seen, I think, a little bit of a reckoning with what's happened to them in a way that we haven't. Trump has been the happy-go-lucky guy running around, and even though he says all this stuff that you do a great job at exposing, it's never seemed to stick. It feels like it's sticking now, and it feels like we're in a very, very different media dynamic where they're going to have a very hard time changing that dynamic between now and the election. And so, yeah, I'm optimistic. I mean, look, we have a lot of work to do. We need to go to work, as your community does. We need to make our calls and our canvassing and our texting and our postcarding and do all this work. If we work really hard, we should be able to have the election we want to have. But the difference between us having the election we want to have and us not having it, I think to a great degree will be based on how much work we all collectively do between now and Election Day.
Simon Rosenberg, head of the Hopium Chronicles. Really appreciate you delivering us the data, the trends, what we should be looking for. Thanks for joining.
And the Hopium. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for all that you do, man. It's been a great partnership, and I learn from you guys every day.
And we learn from you, and the Meidas Mighty do as well. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 3 million subscribers together. Thanks for watching.
Real quick, Meta just changed their algorithm to suppress political content. Please follow our Instagram @MeidasTouch right now as we head towards 400,000 followers so you don't miss a beat.